I used to work remotely out of my basement apartment in Milwaukee. It was a half-underground unit in an old brick triplex. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and it had its own entrance, which I liked. The place had one big downside: it had these tiny, rectangular windows set high up on the walls, practically at ground level. You couldn't really see out of them unless you stood on a chair. I didn't think much of it. I was inside most of the time anyway. I did freelance design, so I worked odd hours and stayed up late. Most nights, I had headphones in, music or podcasts playing while I worked. The weirdness started with the smell. It was faint at first, like wet dirt. I figured it was just part of living in a basement. But it started getting stronger. It smelled like damp soil mixed with something metallic. I told the landlord, and he said he'd check the drains, but nothing ever came of it. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I was working on a project and decided to take a break. I took off my headphones and walked into the kitchen, and I heard this sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was the pipes, but it wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from the window above my sink. I turned off the light, crouched down, and looked up through the window. Nothing. Just the streetlight filtering in through some bushes outside. Then it happened again the next night, this time from the window in my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. Slow and deliberate. It stopped when I moved. At this point, I was genuinely creeped out. But I didn't want to call the cops and sound paranoid, especially since I couldn't see anything. So, I set up my webcam. I had a cheap external cam I used for Zoom calls, and I rigged it to point at the bedroom window. I set it to record overnight, hoping to catch whatever was making the noise. The next morning, I checked the footage. For the first 2 hours, nothing. Then, around 2:47 a.m., the audio picked up a soft shuffling sound. A minute later, the tapping started. The camera didn't show much, just the shadows on the curtain. But then something blocked the light. A shape. A head. Someone was standing outside the window. It paused. Just standing there. Then, very slowly, the person bent down, looked directly into the window, and then walked away. I froze. This wasn't some animal. It wasn't a branch. Someone had crouched down to look into my bedroom at nearly 3 a.m. I called the landlord immediately. He said maybe it was a homeless person, or a drunk, and told me to keep the blinds closed. That was it. The next night, I set up the webcam again, but this time I left the bedroom lights on. I figured if it was dark inside, it was easier to see in. So maybe keeping it bright would deter whoever it was. At 2:41 a.m., there was a knock. Not a tap. A knock. 3 heavy hits to the window frame. Not the glass. The frame. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the kitchen with a knife in my hand, heart pounding, until sunrise. That morning, I checked the footage. This time, the camera caught it clearly. A man. Pale. Bald. Wearing a dark hoodie and no shoes. Standing outside my window. But here's the worst part. He was smiling. Wide. Teeth bared. Like he was enjoying the fear. I went to the police with the footage. They took a statement, promised to patrol the area more often, but they didn't find anyone. I bought a motion sensor floodlight and installed it outside the windows. For a while, things were quiet. Then one night, I woke up to my bedroom filled with light. The sensor had gone off. I grabbed my phone and stayed frozen in bed. I didn't hear anything, but I waited. After a few minutes, I peeked outside. There was a dead rabbit on the window ledge. It had been placed there. Not torn up. Just, set down, neatly, facing the window. I moved out that week. I don't know who he was or what he wanted. But he knew my schedule. He came back after I installed the light. He left a message. And that smile, his face, shows up in my dreams more than I'd like to admit. I still have the webcam file. Sometimes I think about deleting it. But I can't. Because if I ever see that face in real life again, I need to know it's him. In 2014, I took a job as a night custodian at an old high school in upstate New York. I'd been laid off from my previous job, and this was the only thing I could find quickly. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were decent, and it was quiet work. The school was one of those massive brick buildings built in the 1930s. 4 floors. Long hallways. Huge gym. Creaky wooden floors. At night, when the lights were dimmed and the students were gone, the place felt off. I was the only custodian on the night shift. There was a security guard named Cliff who worked the front desk, but he usually just sat in the main lobby watching the monitors and barely spoke. My job was simple: sweep, mop, clean the bathrooms, make sure nothing was broken. I usually started on the top floor and worked my way down. The first week went fine. Nothing strange. Just echoes and the usual weirdness of being in a huge empty building at night. Then I started noticing things. The first time, it was a locker. It was on the 3rd floor, near the math wing. I'd pass it every night, and it was always shut. But one night, it was hanging open just a crack. I figured maybe a student forgot to close it. I pushed it shut and kept moving. The next night, it was open again. Not all the way. Just an inch or 2. Enough to make me stop. I opened it all the way and shined my flashlight inside. Empty. I shut it again, this time making sure it latched. 10 minutes later, when I walked past again, it was open again. This time, wider. I stood still, staring at it. The hallway was dead silent. I called down to the security guard over the walkie-talkie. He said, "You're on the 3rd floor." "Yeah, sometimes the old lockers pop open. Temperature changes. Metal expands." That sounded reasonable. But I still didn't buy it. A few days later, things escalated. I was in the girls' locker room by the gym, cleaning up some garbage left over from practice. The lights in that room are motion sensor, but they shut off quickly if you don't move. I was crouched down, wiping something off the floor, when the lights shut off. Normal. I stood up to reactivate them. But before I moved, I heard footsteps. Quick ones. Like someone running. Not toward me. Around me. I froze. The lights flicked on, and no one was there. I walked out into the hallway. Nothing. That night, I stayed near the lobby for the rest of my shift. The next night, I had to finish cleaning the basement level, the oldest part of the school. There's a storage area down there, behind the old boiler room. It's basically a maze of supply closets, broken desks, old textbooks, things they never threw away. As I turned the corner into the hallway leading to the boiler room, I stopped. The floor was wet. Not puddles, just small, dark footprints. Bare feet. Child-sized. They led from the boiler room down toward the lockers. I followed them slowly, heart racing, phone gripped tight in my hand. The prints ended at a locked storage door. I unlocked it. Empty room. Concrete walls. No windows. And then the door slammed shut behind me. Total darkness. I screamed and banged on the door until my voice cracked. Cliff, the security guard, eventually let me out. I asked if he saw anything on the cameras. He said no. That hallway didn't have coverage. I told him about the footprints. He didn't say a word. Just nodded slightly and walked away. The next morning, I asked one of the daytime custodians if anything strange had ever happened down there. He paused. Then told me to look up the name Rachel Connors. She was a student in the 90s. She died on school grounds. They said she drowned in the swimming pool during after-school practice. But there were rumors that she'd actually gone missing during class, and they found her 2 days later, in the boiler room. That part wasn't public. But the staff knew. They'd sealed that part of the basement off for a while. Eventually, people forgot. I didn't. On my final night there, yeah, I quit not long after. I left my mop bucket by the elevator on the second floor while I went to clean a classroom. When I came back 5 minutes later, the bucket was gone. I found it on the 4th floor. Outside that same locker. Open again. Inside at this time, was a girl's black dress shoe. Wet. Small. The hallway lights flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone at the end of the hall. A girl. Standing. Facing the wall. I quit that night. Left my keys on Cliff's desk and walked out without saying a word. I've had a lot of jobs since then. But I don't take night shifts anymore. And I never go near schools after dark.